most of the time people want time freedom more than they want to do the work. Say you're making $30K a month. For me, if I was making $30K a month, I would rather not do any work and make $30K a month than do all the work. And so in order to get there, usually we have to have a team and they have to be well-trained and all this kind of stuff. But most time it's underperforming team or the owner just does everything and they have no delegation.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Eat, Sleep, and Invest. I'm your host, Brian Driscoll. I'm here with Chandler Saine. What's up, man?
How's it going, dude?
Going. All right, so we're going to talk about processes, systems, how to generate business, grow companies, right?
Yeah, something like that.
All right, well, hey, give everyone a little background. Like, how'd you get into the space and what all do you do?
Yeah, so right now what we're doing, I'm focusing on is growing wholesale companies. So we've scaled 28 companies in the last year and a half, about 17, 18 months to their first 100K a month. And that's kind of what we've been focused on. And we're doing that through, basically revamping people's teams, getting them back to the fundamentals and doing those really well. So, revamping systems, process, all that kind of boring stuff. So that's what we're doing right now. How I got into this space is I actually met my old business partner at college. And we were friends when we were 12 and we played baseball together. And then when I went to school, I was roommates with him and he was wholesaling a little bit. I think he'd done a handful of deals. And I just bought a marketing course. And I was like, dude, I think the SMS stuff you're doing, we could probably do a little bit better than what you're doing right now. So he was doing a deal a month or something right around there. It's 15K, 10, 15K. And 5 months later, we hit 100 grand. It was our first month, just because we were able to increase lead flow and do some other different things with the systems. And I kind of came in, ran operations and grew the team and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's basically how I got into it. It's so I wasn't one of those guys who it's I love real estate. I eat, sleep, and breathe this. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I want to start doing this as my forever thing because I just have this crazy passion. I just liked the idea of business and saw an opportunity to start doing entrepreneurship. And that's kind of what led me into real estate. So that's the short story of how I got started to, basically growing a wholesale company. So, and we grew it up pretty quick from, doing a deal a month to our best month. We closed 13 deals in a month, but we were averaging around 8 or so, give or take. So
that's pretty solid. Which market? So
we were basically doing Atlanta and we were trying to do 30 deals a month in Atlanta. We were trying to be the number one guys because, we met people like Doug and Darren and Phoenix and they're just do one market, go super deep. And we always tried to do that. But whenever we tried to scale further, we'd always just see a massive diminishing return in our marketing. So we'd spend 80, 85K a month in marketing. And instead of growing from 250K a month in revenue, we would just make less profit. And we're dude, there's gotta be a better way to grow. So we actually probably about 2 years ago, opened up Dallas and we spent 25 grand in Dallas over a 5-month period. So we just allocated 5 grand a month to kind of open the market. And we made 600K off of that 25 grand in that new market. So we're damn, that's really good. So then we did the same thing in Raleigh and Durham in North Carolina. So those are the 3 markets that we opened up.
That's pretty solid. And how'd you do it in Dallas? Do you have boots on the ground too, or what'd you do?
Yeah, so we had this whole process. So basically what I realized was the real estate's a supply and demand game. And that's all we're trying to play. So we're just trying to find where the buyers are and find the best economic structure for us to go into as a market. So we realized I did this whole market analysis of our markets in Georgia and realized there was a city called Marietta, Georgia. And our return on our average deal size is 50 grand in that city. Our return on investment was 12x, something absolutely absurd because the market itself was just really good. And so I kind of reverse engineered what that market was specifically, why it was so good and looked for other places around the country that fit that criteria. So for that specifically, it's just days of market less than 15, months of supply less than 2. Now it's a little bit changed because that's shooting up everywhere into the winter months and also just the way the economy is changing. And then median deal size or median home price over 350. And those are the 3 core metrics we're looking for. So I pulled a list. I had there's a software called RPR, which is through the Realtor Association. One of my friends, the broker, and had it. And I was able to have one of my assistants on my team go and pull all the cities in the US that were the top 500 population cities and pull that report for each one. And then we filtered down to find the best markets. And the best ones there's tons in California, but we didn't really want to go to California. There was places in Denver, in Colorado, Dallas, and North Carolina, Virginia, and I think Madison, Wisconsin was actually really close on that list. And then for some reason, like New Mexico had like Albuquerque was pretty close. But those are like the main markets, and we kind of like cut the ones we didn't want. So we were between Texas, North Carolina, and Denver. And then we just kind of went through and picked, okay, well, what from our team right now, from the resource we have right now, like which one's going to be the easiest to open up? So like where do we have boots on the ground? Where do we have access to the MLS? What market do we like just generally like want to be more in? Like what market's homogenous? So like where are the homes like more similar to like suburban style, which is like what we're good at. We really are bad in the city. When it's street by street, we're just not as good. It's hard to do that virtually. So then we just basically said, all right, well, Texas makes the most sense because North Carolina, we didn't have anyone who had MLS access there. Denver, I live there, so I know the market pretty well, and I know it's like not going to be our bread and butter because most of it's kind of like city stuff, and it's like if you don't understand the way the roads are, there's just a bigger learning curve. So we just picked Dallas, and some guy on our team that we just hired. He was a Keegley franchise owner in Dallas, and he also was a realtor who did like 3 deals a month in Dallas. And we have like 3 friends who live there, so we knew a lot of people there. So that was the market we picked. And then we just took the best 50,000 records we could find based on our criteria of like what worked. So that was just individually owned absentee records that were properties between like 1950 and like 2005 or something like that, and something along those lines. And we put it in the best zip codes that had the best like economic numbers. And then we just kind of threw it. This was when texting was still like really popular and popping off before the regulations. And we didn't get a deal for 46 offers. So we were like, dang, this is like, we didn't get a contract. We're like, dang, like, do we suck? Or like, what's going on here? And then we got one. We got like our 47th or 48th offer we gave. We got a contract in Plano, Texas. And our marketing director, he made a really great decision and was just like this is like all autonomous on his own. He's like, screw all these other places. Let's just only market to the zip code for the next month. And we got another 6 deals in Plano. And each of those deals, and an average deal size, I have to go back and look exactly, but it was like $85,000 roughly for each of those deals. And we're like, oh, holy shit. So like then that kind of like prompted us to really like, insert ourselves into Texas. But it took us a while. It took us like about 2-3 months to actually get a contract that was promising. And the first one was just a $57,000 novation that we got. So it was crazy for that.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I did that deal specifically. We sold it in like 3 days. And we had like 18 walkthroughs, and our guy was able to talk up the buyer. And I remember this happening because I was at CG. I was actually speaking on stage when I got the text for like the offer we accepted or we're going to accept. He talked the lady up like $8,000, $9,000 over asking, got her to put down $7,000 non-refundable, no due diligence period, no inspection period, no contingencies, nothing. And this was a conventional finance loan. The house actually didn't appraise, and there was like a $20K gap or like a $15K gap that the buyer had to cover, and we ended up closing it. But it was like a really crazy deal. Like there's no way they made money on that flip. But yeah, it was like, we're like, holy shit, this market's really hot. So that was kind of like how we opened up the market from a tactical and like actual perspective.
That's pretty interesting too, because I'm always curious when people say they do virtual, because a lot of guys out there selling courses and all, like, yeah, just go virtual, generate leads all over the US. It's really cheap. And most of the guys I hear don't do very well with that, but it sounds like how you did it, you're basically diving into the data and making strategic decisions there.
Yeah, I mean, I've always watched these videos like Jamil posted and like a bunch of people like, because we were like super against like multiple markets, and because a lot of people in CG are like, do one market, go really deep, do all this kind of stuff, and that's kind of like the consensus, because it's kind of like we saw it as like shiny object syndrome. And like people on YouTube, like, so like I know Jamil made a video, he's like, be careful when you open up new markets, because like, I remember, for whatever reason I remember this, but he's like, in Florida, like both parties like have to like cancel the contract, so like you could lose money. And like in Miami, there's like not a lot of real buyers or sellers, because it's like drug money stuff. So I was like, we were kind of like scared about it. So we took this like, I was just like, well, why the hell does it like work in our market? And like, how do I just like reverse engineer that and make it work somewhere else? So it actually does work. And that process has worked for myself, and it's worked for, I don't know, probably 100 other people who've used the same process in our program to open up new markets. It's just like very simple, honestly. It's just reversing the data, finding out what was your market like, why was it so good, or why does it work for you, and then put that into a new place. And that's really it.
Nice. All right, that's cool. So, and we're going to get to your process here in a minute, but different topic. So you do a crazy running too, right?
Yeah, I used to run a lot of ultra marathons. I haven't done that in a while, but now I've gotten into mountaineering and endurance stuff. So like, like last weekend we went and climbed this. It's like 6 hours. It was only a 6 hour day, which is like doesn't seem like that long for me, but maybe it does for a lot of people. But we were like climbing this route. It's like this cool ridge. And like the weekend before that, last month we went to Washington and did like a 22-hour day where we climbed this mountain. It was like 20 miles, like 10,000 feet of climbing over glaciers and rock climbing and all kinds of shit. So it was pretty intense.
That's pretty. So you said what's mountaineering? Is that just basically going through the mountain, like climbing mountains?
So yeah, so basically like you have like a couple different things. You have like trail running, which is like the basic. Then you have like hiking, which is just like hiking on trails. And you have like what's called mountaineering. Mountaineering is like a little bit more of like, think of like, it's not necessarily like rock. It's like a mixture of like rock climbing and hiking together, but it's like more technical. So it's like technical hiking is like how I describe it. So it's like you actually have to have like technical mountain like climbing skills or want them, and then like you also have a lot more route finding because you're not usually on like a actual like dirt path. You're kind of just like out on the mountain trying to like look out there and you're like, all right, how do I get through this? And you have to like kind of wiggle your way through the mountain, if that makes sense.
So you're basically in the woods and you got to visualize like the route to take.
Yeah, so you're using your GPS map, using your eyes, and it's really fun in the winter as well. It's like, we'll go do like ski like really big lines where we have like, crampons, ice axes, skis, and like the skis are on our back and we're like climbing through like snow, ice, rock, all that kind of stuff. And then you'll go and you ski like this tight couloir, which is like just like a really steep, like little narrow gap where snow builds up in the mountain. And it might be like, 10, 15 feet wide, and you have to ski down it for 1,000, 2,000 feet. And like, if you fall, like you might die. So you don't want to fall. But yeah, like stuff like that, just a little like adrenaline boost.
That's pretty cool. What got you into that?
I have kind of always been a little bit fascinated with it, but a year and a half ago, so I'd done this stuff by myself, but not like to as extreme of an extent. So I climbed a mountain that was 20,000 feet tall. It was like 6,088 meters. So it was like just right at 20,000. And I did like 2.5 years ago when I went to South America for a few months. That was in Bolivia. And it was like one of the hardest things I ever did because we slept at like 18,000 feet. So like you can't breathe for shit. And then two, we had to wake up at midnight to start walking up this glaciered, crevassed ice field. And we had to ice climb up this like 200-foot wall. And this was like 19,000 feet. And then we had to climb the summit and like, we're like climbing on rock with crampon. It was like really crazy. And I was like, holy shit, this was like a wild experience. And so I was kind of craving to do something like that again. So I like do stuff like that on my own, but not like nearly as intense. And then my buddy, who is who was an acquisitions manager for multifamily and commercial properties, he was cold calling, and he cold called our now friend James, who was a professional mountain guide and is also a commercial broker for 8 years. And he's climbed Denali 10 times and some of the tallest mountains in South America. And so he's like super experienced with all that kind of stuff. And like kind of like finding a mentor for business is like you find a mentor for, doing this kind of stuff as well, because it's inherently quite dangerous. And if you don't know avalanche safety, if you don't know, the risks that exist out there and how to mitigate those, and, you could get yourself in a pickle pretty quick. So, so it's like really important to have that. And once you have a good mentor, then you can kind of like push the boundaries a little bit more and improve your skill sets and all that kind of stuff. So that's how I got into it to a lot deeper degree, but we were doing some of it before, just not as safe or as intensely, I guess, if that makes sense. That's
pretty cool. I'm just picturing, I'm like, I don't know if I'd enjoy that or not.
Yeah.
It seems really intense.
Yeah. I got into it initially because Courtney Dauwalter, she's like this crazy ultra runner. She ran into, so I was listening to podcasts. I used to wrestle in college. So like, I've always been like super hard into like push your body, push your mind, like really intense stuff. And I stopped wrestling after my freshman year of college. So I'm like, dude, I'm not going to like be the best in the world. Like I'm really good, but I'm not going to be number one. I'm not going to be Jordan Burroughs, if you guys know wrestling. I want to make a lot of money, and that's not my path. So I stopped. I just lifted in the gym. I didn't work out for like 2 years from a cardio perspective. I listened to this podcast with Joe Rogan and Courtney Dauwalter. She's like this crazy savage ultra runner. And she ran this 240 mile race, 240 miles straight in Moab, Utah. and she won and got first place by 9 hours. And I was like, holy shit, like that's incredible. So that day I was feeling super inspired, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go on the treadmill today, see how far I can run. And like I ran 5.5 miles or something like that. And that night I went home and I signed up for a 50 miler in Colorado. I lived in Georgia at the time. And I was like, you know what, if I'm going to get good at running in the mountains, I should probably move to Colorado. So then I moved to Colorado and trained in the mountains, and I ended up just staying here. But yeah, it was like 54 miles the race with like 10,000 feet of climbing at high altitude in the Colorado mountains. And that was like my first exposure to like this kind of stuff. And I was like, you know, this is kind of fucking sick. So
Dude, that's insane. It's like you jumping out of the airplane, building a chute on the way down.
yeah, dude. It's like Travis Pastrana when he jumped out of the airplane. I don't know if you guys seen that, like Nitro Circus, but he jumped out of the airplane like in his underwear, and then like some guy grabbed him and they went tandem like in the air and then like landed. It's like crazy.
Yeah, I like it. You know what? That's interesting too, because you're like, okay, I'm gonna do this. You signed up for it,
Yeah.
and now it's like kind of like, okay, now I got to figure out how to do it. It's kind of like same thing you do in business. You know, it's like here's where we're going. We don't know how we're getting there yet, but we're gonna do it.
Yeah. People always ask me like, why'd you move to Colorado? And like my story is always like a little bit different than everyone else's.
You're right.
People are like, oh, for work. No, not really.
Yeah, so that's interesting. All right, so back to the business. So you help people also. So you scaled business, crushed it, climbing mountains, and now you're helping other people replicate what you did in the business side, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
The guys you work with, what's the ideal type of investor? Like the avatar? Like do you work with noobs? Do they go to be doing deals? Like what have you found works best with your system?
For sure. Yeah, I'd say people who are experienced and know how to do deals, right? Like you got to know how to do deals. Let's say if you're doing at least like, you know, at the very minimum, like 10 deals a year would be like the lowest we'd accept. You know, we work with people doing upwards of 50, 60 deals a year, right? So anywhere in there, I'd say the common theme is like you just know that you either want to buy back your time by delegating, by like you're tired of doing acquisitions, you need to build a team, or your team's not performing, or you just simply like want to build the foundation right the first try, right? So those are the two types of avatars we're working with. The people who are doing, you know, multiple deals a month, it's all about scaling themselves out of acquisitions and like building a great team and like becoming great leaders. And like obviously like all the systems need to be dialed in and stuff like that. So we make sure we do that. But usually the problem is people, and that's the biggest issue. And even if you have a team, but they're not performing, it's like revamping that. So like I was just like making a video for like one of our partners that we work with of how he was doing like $31,200 and something a month is like his average whenever we started working with him. And in October, he's set to close like 130K. And that's been we started working on August 1st. So it's been 60 days and his projected pipeline has 4x'd. And he already had a team. He already had everything in place. All we did was we listened to his call. I mean, not all we did. There's a lot of things we did, but we listened to his calls and we realized that, all right, there's no like process for like how we train these people. There's no method to any of the madness. Like the process of the sales calls is like not being followed. And the people actually doing the sales calls are completely underqualified. And so we had to replace all those people over the last 60 days and then install like a management process for how we're going to train the team. And like literally he went from he was doing $32,000 a month, roughly $31,000 a month, which is $400K a year, give like a little bit less, to he'll make probably more money in October from a net income perspective than he's made almost as much. He'll almost make as much probably as he's made for the entire year, just from like making some tweaks. So I think that's the biggest thing is like coming in and like having the right systems and knowing which ones to put in. Because if you pull the wrong lever, then it doesn't matter. If you solve the problem that's not actually there, then it doesn't fix anything. You don't move forward. So that's like probably the biggest thing we help with is picking the right problem to solve and then helping you implement that.
What are the top problems you see?
Yeah, depends on the stage, right? So let's just say you're doing between 30 and 50K a month. The number one problem is usually the dollar per hour of the actual. This is always going to be the bottleneck, but the number one problem is like the dollar per hour of the entrepreneur, like the guy who started the business. And usually it's because they either have an underqualified salesperson doing acquisitions, or this person's doing everything themselves and they don't know how to like give up the work and delegate to someone else because maybe they've tried in the past to hire someone and it hasn't worked out, So they're just like, you know what, I'm the only person who's able to do this, so I'm going to keep doing it. So those are the main two things that I see. If people are doing that amount of revenue or that amount of deals per month, is they either have underperforming people. And so they're like, I was talking to a guy yesterday. He's like, dude, like I hired this team, and this is before he started working with us. I hired this team, and like now I'm making way less money than I would be making if I was the one doing everything. And that's like a double-edged sword, because yes, you're right, but most of the time people want time freedom more than they want to do the work. Even and they would make the same. Like, say you're making $30K a month. For me, if I was making $30K a month, I would rather not do any work and make $30K a month than do all the work. Me personally, that's like what a lot of people want. And so in order to get there, usually we have to have a team, and they have to be well trained and all this kind of stuff. But most time it's underperforming team, or the owner just does everything and they have no delegation. Those are the two main issues, I'd say.
That's interesting. So now when you come in, what all do? So obviously you kind of like, it's kind of like an audit. You're auditing everything they do and finding the bottleneck. Say they got, the team is an issue. What do? You tell them, hey, you know what? You got to replace these guys. And do you help them replace them? Or like, how are you helping people find that qualified talent?
We'll do a couple things. So we do what's called a implementation call. And so on that call, basically we're going to like confirm, like, does the business model like work right now? Like, can we scale this or not? A lot of times we can't. If someone's like solo doing everything, then like they're always like super good. Like their ROI is always super solid. That's not usually a problem. And so there's nothing for us to fix. It's all about going straight to delegating. And I'll talk about that in a second. But if, let's say, they've delegated out stuff to an underperforming team, then there's always stuff in what we call the manufacturing line, which is just like the conversions of the acquisitions funnel. So, like leads to net leads to appointments to offers to contracts to sold deals, average deal size. Those are the main core metrics we're going to look to diagnose the business. And based on every lead channel, whether you're in person or virtual, in different markets and different trends across the US, we know what the conversion should be for basically every different business. So if there's a flag, then we have what we call the guide to growth, which is just like kind of like a table of contents that says, like, if lead to net lead conversions wrong, here's all the possible variables and here's all the possible solutions, and here's the SOPs that we need to implement in order to fix the problem. And we have that for each part of the business. So net lead to appointment to offer, et cetera, increasing average deal size, you name it. And so we just give that SOP to the client and we help them implement it thoroughly, and we teach them and fill in the gaps. And so that's what we'll do to fix the ROI, to make sure the business is working. And so that's what we did for this client. Is he was already spending like 10 to 15K a month in marketing. He already had a team. He had an acquisition guy, he had 2 lead managers, some cold callers, and some admin. And so like all we had to do was come in and just like fix the numbers, fix the date, like the funnel. And then now he's to a point where, he'll probably be doing about $1 million a year on a run rate. And then after that, it's scaling accordingly to what he wants. So if you have an underperforming team in place, if you have a performing team in place, maybe that's you, maybe you have like 1 or 2 key guys, we'll do the same audit because we want to make sure that there's no low-hanging fruit. Because a big one that we see is like increasing the deal size. So like, we want the deal size to be about 10% of whatever your median home price is. So a lot of people, it's 15K is like honestly around where the deal size is. That realistically should be about 30 for most of the markets in the US or higher. The higher your deal size. Like I had one client who hit 360K in a month. He went from 50K to 360K in 6 months because we were able to get his deal size. He's in Denver to like 65 grand through like some strategies like wholesales and innovations and stuff like that. And honestly, just like being like focusing on it is a super important thing. But to reverse back is like, if you're a solo operator, the thing that we do first is we figure out how do we like maximize your time, because everything is focused on is like you're the guy who's going to drive the revenue, drive the income for the business, because you're going to be the best at acquisitions and you're going to be the sole source of revenue for a little while. And so we can really get that delegated out. So the first thing we do is we do what we call a daily optimizer, which is just going to be like an audit of your time. So figure out like where's your time wasted, where's your time not wasted, and where's your time best spent. And then we're going to basically take all the things that are like, so we score like basically like how high, like on a relative scale, like is this worth your time or not? It's 0, 1, or 2. 2 being like it's super worth your time, 1 being it's kind of, and 0 being it's not. And if all the zeros, we go ahead and like we outsource those things. So usually that looks like an executive assistant, a lead manager, or a follow-up specialist, kind of like a dynamic role there. Those are usually the two options we go for. Sometimes it's like a TC Dispo type person or a TCEA Dispo type person. That's a little bit more rare. It just kind of depends on the person's business, whether they're doing outbound or inbound or a mixture of both, or what resources they have. So, and also like where they're at. Are they burnt out? Do they have to have different support? I'll take all of that into account and, kind of come up with a plan of like who we need to find to really free us up and how we're going to do it. So that's basically from a high level of like how it would work for that side. And then,
that's pretty interesting too. Yeah, because I think everyone starts in a business, then they start crushing it, and the owner was doing everything themselves. So there has to be a transition to find other people to grow and then also not break the system. And it's interesting you're talking about I think you said there's a daily optimizer, because it's like you're doing all this stuff. How do you pick what to delegate? So it's a strategic way to be like, okay, this will free up 2 hours of my day. I can have someone else do this for $20 or whatever it is.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and it's like really easy to like, one's like, the daily optimizer, most people like know like what's wasted their time. And like, it's just like one, it like puts it on paper, because I feel like when you put things on paper, you always realize it yourself. And then two, it's like also we need to know too, it's like what you're doing, because otherwise like how are we going to help you, But yeah, it's like taking all those things, like another thing people are like kind of like get lost on and overthink on is like, well, what role should I even hire? Because like I have all these things I need to stop doing, and they feel like 10 different jobs. And it's like you can usually group most of those in with like a good EA at the beginning. Like if you don't have a good EA, like I feel like you're just going to spin your wheels a lot. Like Dan Martell talks about it. It's like how you should feel at each stage of like who you need to hire. And I want to say like, gosh, I can't remember what he says, but basically he has a delegation ladder. I think it's in chapter like 7 or 11. And just go read that chapter if you want some clarity on what I'm talking about, because I have it in my notes. I have to look at it every time.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's a really good book too. Yeah, if anyone hasn't read Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell and doesn't have an assistant, definitely go read that.
Yeah, I've read it twice and it's still so good every time.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, we're about out of time. Chandler, what's the best way? If someone wants to connect with you, like, you know what, I'm in that situation, what's the best way for them to connect?
My Instagram, Chandler Saine on Instagram, just DM me. I mean, if you guys want to do that, it's the best way to get in contact with me. Otherwise, you can email me, which I just emailed a bunch of people back from the end of August. So I'm super good at email. So don't do that. Go definitely DM me. But my email is just chandler@chandlersaine.com.
Cool. And is that your website too, chandlersaine.com?
I should have a website. I don't have one. I really should make one.
That's interesting too. You're crushing out there, don't even have a website. It just shows you. Some people get held up on, I can't start my business till I get my website and logo done.
I know. I'm like, dude, I got an Instagram and a YouTube, I should definitely have a website, but.
All right, cool. And so you're saying Instagram's the best way to connect?
Yeah, definitely hit me on Instagram.
Cool.
Search up my name. I'm like the only Chandler Saine that exists in the world. So
yeah, I was going to ask you what your top book is, but what's the top book you'd recommend? Would that be Dan Martell, or what's the top book you'd recommend to people?
Buy Back Your Time is like a good one that covers kind of like all of the spectrums of business. But I think the one that was probably one of the most impactful books for me was The Dichotomy of Leadership. So like I never struggled with like having ownership or accountability on myself, but I struggle with like how do you like instill that into other people? And like, how do you not like take too much responsibility off of other people's plates and like keep other people empowered, but not like make them feel like diminished or anything like that. And The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink, honestly, is like one of the best leadership books I've read. For me, it like really resonated well. And like for a lot of people, I've recommended. I'd say that book, 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, another fantastic like team building book. And then Buy Back Your Time is a great one. And then the other one that I've read a few times is Ready, Fire, Aim. That one's fantastic as well. I really personally like that one. It just makes me think a lot. I don't necessarily know how much of the stuff I've actually implemented from the book, but for whatever reason, when I listen to that one on audio, it just like really sparks a lot of ideas for me. So those are like the 4 I go back and listen to all the time.
That's cool. And it's interesting too, because I do the same thing. It's like you read it and you're like, I don't know how much I took from it, but you planted a seed in your head. You might not even use what you learned in a book for like 10 years sometimes, but it's there.
It's kind of like when I was a kid and I'd go to church with my parents and I'd be like, I wouldn't listen to church at all, but I'd be thinking about my life. Like, man, I should really like, do better here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Hey, well, thanks for coming. We appreciate you.
Yeah, man, for sure, Brian. It was good talking.